Hello, good morning, everybody. This time it's good morning because we are in the Asian time zone, but we are not just in Asia, we are even far away today. I'm very happy to have David Perkins here. David talks to us from Australia, and we check the audio and we check the video, and this is wonderful. So it's to a certain extent unbelievable, but big fun. And I met David at LinkedIn, and so I'm happy to have him here today, that we talk about a topic which is maybe not for everybody so familiar, because it's not a kind of deep tech discussion. It's much more about the interplay of the financial world and the patent or IP world. We talk about FinTech. So, David, thank you very much for being here.
No, thank you for having me, Alex.
Explain us a little bit about you, please.
Oh, well, about me, I'm a patent attorney, Australian patent attorney, or as we now say, trans-Tasman patent attorney, which means Australia and New Zealand, and I've worked for 20 plus years, mainly in the big firms, as a lot of patent drafting. So not a litigator, all patent drafting largely. I was a patent drafting mule for IBM work for a long time in the big firms, and so wrote a lot of patents covering computer software, computer hardware, firmware, but also sort of e-commerce, early e-commerce, everything IBM was doing, and that was all US patents. So that's the bulk of my professional experience. And now I'm out on my own, just doing the same thing really, but also a broader service, as we talked about earlier. Just enjoying my time, I guess, sort of branching out into a more, dare I say, holistic service, or exploring new things anyway.
Okay. And how do you came into that world of FinTech? So, that's not typically for a patent attorney. That's not really an issue which comes close to them. So where comes that?
True. Oh, well, I wouldn't say it was passion necessarily. It was sort of something that I shrugged my shoulders and didn't think much about. But we have a lot of FinTechs in Australia. There's 300 plus on some directory at least. The people you've not heard of necessarily. They're not retail brands, yes, or not all of them. But the more you get into things, you do develop an interest, and there's a lot going on. And of course, once you have a few clients, you start paying attention to what they're doing. So that's how I got into it, happenstance, if you like.
But you have also an education on it. You have a professional training in finance and investment. I mean, that's again nothing normal, I would say, for a patent attorney, right?
Oh, true. I guess that came out of, I was sort of involved in founding of a online insurance brokerage early in my career, I suppose, in parallel with my patent work, and that sort of got me interested because we were raising money and that sort of thing. So that got me interested in looking at finance, and so I did do some qualifications there just to, so I do bring a bit of a financial lens. But I mean, those qualifications for a long time ago now. So, but it does stay with you. It does stay with you.
So we picked it out.
Yeah, I'm surprised you know that.
Okay, wonderful. So, David, when it comes to FinTech, so and you work with them, what is your point? What would you say is important for them to understand about IP in general, not just patents, but also patents? What would you say? What is a recommendation? How do you approach them about the interplay of their business model, of their use cases, and how they behave? For example, user journeys, customer experience, all that things, together with IP.
Oh, well, I guess there's, a recurring theme, if you like, with clients is they believe that what they have is not patentable. So that's a common sort of prejudice against for a lot of clients, but especially in FinTech, because there's this idea that, okay, we're just playing with data, or we're just, they think it's very trivial. But of course, there's obviously a business aspect of business innovation, if you like, which is abstract concepts. But the people who are running these companies are not necessarily at the coalface of developing the technology underneath. So it's a matter of saying, well, actually, if you want to deliver that product, then Maybe it's an idea, but there's some real technology behind that at a deeper level that the tech people are working on, the dev team's working on. So it's a matter of teasing out what actually the technical innovation is, and that is something that is a potential candidate for patent protection.
I mean, David, is it your experience too? So my experience is that typically people, let's call them inventors, okay? But they don't feel themselves as inventors. So they are not classical engineers who have a certain, let's say, inventor gene in their DNA and want to be an inventor. To a certain extent, want to be recognized as an inventor. So these guys, they don't feel themselves in that way, and that means they don't think there is something invented, and so they even don't ask.
Yeah. Well, I think that's common to a lot of fields, of course, where the lead innovator, if you like, has just responded to a problem in what they thought was the obvious way, and of course they don't think there's an invention. But if you look at the literature, then there definitely is. So that's, I think, common to a lot of fields. In FinTech especially, I think there's a difference between management or the entrepreneur on one hand and the technology people on the other hand. And so, the management, the entrepreneur thinks it's an easy implementation because they go away and tell the technologists to do it. And the technology people think it's very basic and easy. But, if you take a bigger picture, then there is obviously something that has been created, which is new and innovative and compelling and very often patentable.
Yeah. I mean, what I try to teach to them in the training programs, and we do a lot for people who are not classical technical field. We try to explain them as soon as you can put digital in front of it. Okay, so digital business model, digital use case. Yeah, when you can put digital on it, that means that you use a technical mean, and quite often you solve technical problems with that technical mean. And even when it is to run a business model, but basically you solve a technical problem with technical mean. Oh, you should think about patents. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as anybody who's had any experience of technology, especially digital technology, it never works the first time. So of course, there is a amount of problem solving.
Okay, and so are you involved also in teaching that people? So in anyhow creating awareness for IP. Also, the icons, so trademarks and design rights, and because at least what I learned from Asia, in Europe, in United States, that the awareness is relatively low in that field. It's anyhow relevant for them. So also in terms of freedom to operate, so they ignore IP to a certain extent, and that has two sides. I mean, one side is you have no exclusivity because you never thought about file a patent, but on the other hand, you can infringe with what you're doing there.
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, there is a lack of an awareness, I guess, and I think that maybe comes down to traditional financial services, where they have essentially ignored IP just because they haven't needed to look at IP terribly much. But that's changing with the new generation of FinTechs coming through, I think, that do need at least some starter IP. And if they've got a serious business, sometimes they look to really establish a patent program to shore up their position for sure.
So do you think when it comes to FinTech startups that it is also a financial issue in terms of collecting money, getting money for funding for them, having also IP and that they are able to show that to investors?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's many businesses that say, oh, look, we just want to buy a number of patents to put on the wall. It's largely driven by investment concerns, I think. And so once a funding round is coming up, then definitely let's get some patents happening, or let's look at refreshing our earlier patents and maybe filing one or two for new implementations or integrations, whatever it might be. So yeah, it's definitely a funding issue, and I think once you get up to the mid-level or a much more established level, it's a different type of decision-making format that's involved.
And how do you approaching them? So you attract them via LinkedIn and then have a certain exposure, because of course I saw that
Yeah,
that you're
it's
quite
referral
active
type
there.
work.
Okay.
Yeah, so a mix, but I mean, you're quite right. There is very little education around this, and I don't know what the right avenue is, of course, because if you don't know a problem, you're not necessarily looking for the solution. But a theme is, I think, funding. So people, do start asking themselves, or often they've got the feedback directly. Look, we would invest in you, but just go and get a patent first. Just help us make this an easier decision. Investors do look for a patent, and sometimes that's just for their own peace of mind. It's on their checklist. And I mean, in some cases, I've heard more in the US, they know they can sell the patent perhaps to another startup if it's, a tightly fought over space. So for exit purposes, if the startup fails, which a lot of them do, of course.
Yeah, and do investors also talk about? I guess you are involved then in discussions, and do they also talk about the enforcement of such patents? Because I mean, one thing is that you have some, let's say, yeah, so that you can show off. Look, we are inventive. So signaling from coming from institutional economics perspective, you can signaling that you are.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But is it also a discussion about enforcement and who is financing that, and is there a detectability of an infringement situation? Is that also a discussion?
Oh yeah, I mean, enforcement's usually something that people pray never happens. I think, especially when they're looking for money, so they don't have. I mean, there is such a thing as IP insurance that you can get, but that could be a long, drawn-out process. It may be prohibitively expensive. So people are really looking for patenting for that sort of deterrent effect, and also to demonstrate some technology and market leadership, of course, and a signal, as you say, that we're serious about our technology. It's a proxy for the fact that we have innovative technology. So it's a signal to investors, a positive signal that, we have something, and also a signal to potential competitors that, hey, we also have something. And there is an outside risk that you don't want to get too close to us, because you never know, we might be in a position to enforce this. But I think a lot of people at that funding stage are very much looking to avoid enforcement scenarios.
And do they cover mainly the Australian market, or is that also a more international activity in terms of when we make fintech, we can do that everywhere, because the business logics typically work in whichever market we would like to be, and that has nothing to do with Australia.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there are some fintechs that are, country by country, because for regulatory reasons, as you can imagine, highly regulated, and also privacy security. But of course, there are many that are, absolutely international in scope. So yeah, after an Australian domestic filing of some sort, and sometimes that's Australia, sometimes that's the United States, there would be an international patent application put in as a placeholder for rights around the world. If that becomes, as that becomes necessary, depending on the timelines, of course.
I mean, we see that right now. One of my students works on the patent strategy from Ping An, so the biggest insurance company from China, and so this is amazing how heavily they patent. And I mean,
oh yeah, yeah.
Some people are even not aware that an insurance company has a patent strategy, but in fact, they are one of the top 10 filers at WIPO for PCT applications.
Oh yes. Well, I mean, there's a hell of a volume coming out of China, but I mean, not of all of its quality, of course. There is there's been the 5-year plan. We're going to be the biggest patent filer and all that. And I mean, when you're doing searching, it's a real issue. And I was talking to some colleagues at Derwent Innovation, the sort of analytics platform. They own the Derwent, patent information. And they do the same thing as I do, which is separate all the Chinese filings, put that to one side, and quarantine that, because it's just too difficult to sort through.
Okay,
And if you want to look at that, we can look at that later. But we'll just look at the everywhere but China filings first. just
Yeah.
to make things sensible. Yeah, yeah. But they're following a hell of a lot. There's no doubt about it. It's half the results in some areas.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. 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 It's really a volume, and we have to deal with it. Um, so, is there a kind of, let's say, generic strategy which you say, so when I know not that much about a certain fintech, but I can start with a first initiative, with a first strategy, which you would recommend to them to think about it? What would that be?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, the strategy is astoundingly simple, and that's just get patent pending. That's the really what they want, and that's the first step. But I mean, you do start thinking about, okay, well, what's the purpose of the patent pending? And in the background, the owner's maybe not thinking about, building a portfolio or anything like that. But you need to hopefully establish that minimum block against anybody following you in. So some fintechs will only have, one or two potential areas of marginal patentability. Okay, well, if you want a patent, we can look at patent pending. Other people, it might be, okay, we've got a lot of material here, so what's the focus? Well, we just want to focus on what would stop anybody else following into that market. So, the cornerstone patent is the first one to file, the one big basic patent. And then, of course, there's perhaps a product roadmap that, 1 to 3 years out post-launch. And then you might have some tentative plans around what might be patented down the line. Obviously, you don't want to publish everything that's yet to be released. So there's definite issues around not publishing everything at the outset, because as any patent attorney will know, there's always that inventor who's published their grand opus international application and they haven't built half the things, and it's all speculative, and it's absolutely a self-invalidating disclosure for everything they'd planned to do for the next 10 years. And that's a situation to avoid, obviously.
Yeah. So, I mean, to a certain extent, you have to train, you have to teach that people how to behave with IP, I guess. Because typically they come out of let's say, business administration, education, or something like that, with a financial background, maybe also they come from digital technologies, but typically in both cases, so the digital guys don't have really a, let's say, IP culture. They tend to ignore IP, so IP is evil, from at least.
Oh yeah.
And you have the other guys, you have these financial guys, they don't take care anyhow about IP. So how do you deal with that, let's say, mind, with that kind of mindset with that people?
Oh, well, as you probably know, Alex, people are very reluctant to be educated sometimes. It's sometimes a hard job. But, I mean, some people, especially from a business background, are incredibly savvy about what they want to achieve in the patenting system. And it's always an eye-opener on the other hand, too. But you're right, there is, especially for developers, there is a traditional cultural reluctance to believe in IP, I guess. Who was the character, Richard Stallman, years ago, getting around telling everybody software patents are evil, patents are terrible, they'll stop you writing anything. So there was a lot of hysteria that's perhaps largely past now, but I think, developers don't think they're doing anything special. They're too close to their work, of course. And I think the entrepreneurs who really embrace the patent system and the IP system really start to think very strategically in some cases, and they've got a very good grasp on, what's achievable and what they should be doing. And so that's always a joy to work with, of course.
Okay, and you also work with, let's say, case studies or anyhow, so you have examples and show that to others and say, look, that's a cool company, or look at them, they are quite successful, and to a certain extent that has something to do with their IP. Is that a way of creating showcases to raise the awareness from others?
Oh, not my experience. I mean, if you look at, say, Square Incorporated, you would have seen those terminals. that people use out and about. You know, that's a great example. They've got a massive portfolio. They've been very successful, but I don't find there's a lot of aspirational business people don't aspire to own big, fancy patent portfolios, and I can see why, because they're very expensive, of course. And you know, I think you do have to demonstrate the benefits. And as we know in IP, people are only sort of wise after the fact sometimes when they've gone through a patent litigation or been on the receiving end of having to, you know, pivot their technology away from some sort of enforcement situation. So, you know, the people have been chastised by the patent system. They're always asking about IP insurance and freedom to operate, but nobody else.
Okay.
So it's something to keep a weather eye out on. But no, I haven't found the case study sort of situation terribly helpful, I must say.
So a thing which I see quite often from the work with companies which are a little bit away from the traditional patent system, that these guys, like yesterday, I had a company which makes systems for the construction industry, and it's a kind of digital twin technology which they are using, and they create digital twins from buildings. Yeah, and they were and they were totally shocked when I showed them some patents which more or less explain in detail what they are doing. Yeah, so they, I mean, it is obviously a field where we have thousands of patents, and they thought that what they are doing has nothing to do with IP at all. And so, how do you deal with people who are so far away that they don't understand that freedom to operate is an issue, and that you need money for that, you need a budget, and it is not a snapshot issue, because FinTechs have the tendency to change their business models quite often and to adapt to them. And it can mean this week you do not infringe, next week with your next idea you infringe heavily. So how do you deal with that when you try to when you explain that?
I've never succeeded ever in explaining that, and because I mean, how can they believe it's real? They've been operating sort of an enterprise with real technology, and they haven't had a lawsuit drop on them, so they don't believe you. And quite rightly, because they've been operating. But once they go through that litigation, $1 million a year litigation for 4 years, 5 years, well, they've had a long time to think about it. And, you know, sometimes in those companies, there's been a director appointed whose last company went through that, and everything takes on a different complexion. And they are the people who tell the war stories internally around the C-suite table, what have you. And that's when it becomes a real thing. Of course, those industries that are in heavily patent intensive, you know, they know the situation. They're very dialed into that. But the other people, as you say, operating with impunity, very merrily, they're enjoying their blissful ignorance. And there's no way of interrupting that, as far as I know. I'd love to hear if there is. Telling horror stories has never really worked.
Yeah. I mean, they feel that they are vulnerable on their own. So, I mean, one thing which I have quite often when I talk with not experienced inventors, let me say it in that way, is that they don't understand that you can have a patent, especially when you have a combinatoric invention. So you have a patent for something, but that doesn't mean that you are allowed to do it. Yeah. So I mean, they have the impression, like from the whatever pharmaceutical or chemical industry. So when you filed a successful patent for your molecule, and you get it granted, so that means it is new and it is inventive, so nobody else has access to that molecule, then I'm allowed to do it. But when you have that combinatory thing, and I mean, software patents are to a certain extent per definition combinatoric inventions, because we don't invent here something scratch up typically, and that means you have a certain level, but beyond that level there's well patented technology, and that doesn't mean that you have a freedom to operate just because you have a patent. I mean,
yes, it can be a difficult thing to explain that there's a master patent out there, and and then you're drawing Venn diagrams and this type of thing, and it all gets very abstract. That's if you look at the big companies, they have these war chest of patents, and they just weigh each how many patents that the other side has and work it out from there. So I guess at least they've got a foot in the door for negotiating, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, that's reasonable to say, okay, I have my own patent portfolio, and this is a kind of blue chip for negotiation with others. I mean, it's better having it's better than having nothing. Yeah. And I mean, how do you deal with the fact that so it's something which I have to explain again and again, that a patent is first of all a forbidding right, in terms of you have. It's not so much about the question what do you have invented. It's a question what you want to forbid others, and that your competition is the cornerstone. And it's not an inventor award. It's nice that you get a patent, but the cornerstone is what do you want to at least forbid or enforce against others.
Yes.
Is that also difficult to explain?
Oh, well, it never really comes up. I mean, I know the press releases will say, our company Acme has been awarded a patent in Australia, United States, Europe, and they do treat it like an award, as you say. But the startups do have, I think, inherently that sort of knowledge that it is to block competition. So they come with that mindset that, well, we didn't think we'd invented anything anyway, so we don't believe this is a prize. But I think they intuitively understand. They come to it with the right mindset that, no, we're just trying to stop other people doing what we're doing. And you're quite right, they don't necessarily think about a blocking patent, but often they've pivoted away from what is formally the patented technology or the incumbent business model. So it's not always a big issue, freedom to operate, sometimes, because they are it's inherently a model which is different and has broken away from the existing paradigm.
So what comes up here quite often is, in my experience, that these fintechs have no idea what is patentable in their world. So because they have no clue about computer invented implemented inventions or software patents, or however you want to call it. So they can't believe, on the one hand, how heavy the patent portfolios are in that field, but especially for their own business model, they don't have an idea what might be patentable here. So can you give us some examples? What is typically patentable in such a business model?
Oh, well, I guess anything that's, interacting with technology is obviously something to look at, and, that's, interacting with hardware devices. So, be that a mobile handset or an FPOS device or whatever, but you do start getting into the more nuanced cases. So, if you have a robo-advice platform, if you know that terminology, where you have some sort of AI machine that's taking input, having discussion with somebody, giving advice. I had a friend of mine who invented a robo-advice platform, and I guess you think, okay, there's what's patentable there. It's just decision tree, if you like, but it actually invented a very neat interface, which was about the user, the people sort of seeking financial advice, had to drag what they call decision tiles, from one part of the screen to another to put it in certain bins, and that would dynamically update the number of sort of questions and issues they had to deal with, and they had to drag these tiles across everywhere. And so I thought, well, hang on, this is actually patentable technology. So we ended up filing something for that, but that was that was an education for me as well, because it's the sort of thing that you can easily dismiss. So I think it is, I don't think there's one size fits all. It is just a matter of having that discussion and iteratively digging through what might be patentable there, because sometimes it is something surprising.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a question of, as you said, discussing with them. What I try to tell them is, explain me what you're doing, and then why is that possible what you're doing, and why another one is not doing that. So why they do it different. And as you said, they are so close to.
Oh yeah, you can never ask them what have you invented. Well, I don't nothing, you know. So sometimes, well, what have you done? What are you doing? And also, what do you want to stop others from doing? Sort of coming back to your forbidding right sort of issue, you know. And they say, oh, we definitely want to stop them doing this. And you have a look at that, and sometimes that's because it's actually the clever bit. And so it's a matter of terminology, I suppose. It's all a war of words.
Now, yeah, I'm telling them, explain me your nightmare, your digital nightmare. And tell me what's frightening you, and then we can look at it.
Yeah, so well, oh, that's a very good approach. Yes, that's.
No, I mean, what typically what these guys don't really see is that I try to help them. So you don't have to do it, you don't have to want to do it, you even don't have to realize anything of that. Just explain me how you would do it, if you have that resources, if you have access to that data. Yeah. So a typical situation is that they tell me, oh, we don't have access to that data. Yeah, there is another one who has that access. And I tell them, listen, the first thing what you should do is file a patent, what you would do when you have access to that data. And after you filed it, you go to that partner and talk with them, because now you have the patent application about the usage of that data. And this is a wonderful starting point for a discussion with the guys who have the data.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's all data driven. I mean, open banking is the real driver with all these fintechs. And it's all about getting access to the data, and it's really sort of, you know, putting a shock to the big trading banks, because it's chipping away at every little business product they've got one by one. You know, credit cards are now buy now, pay later sort of offerings, and there's goodness knows how many of those. And so, yeah, it's all about the data at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, my point is that that typically that people misunderstand the fact that you don't have to do, you even don't have the intention at the moment to do it. It is enough to explain something which is new and inventive to get a patent. And that means, and that means just explain me what would you do when you have access to that data. And then you start a negotiation, and not later, when after you discussed with them, there's a certain
somebody else has done it.
Yeah, exactly, that they file it. I mean, that's again, it's a culture issue. It's an attitude to understand that's not a good idea to explain others your business plans and later on start with filing. I mean, it's simply too late.
Yeah, I mean, I think
the wrong guys.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I wish more of them did that. A lot of them just want to know about how enforceable is confidentiality, and I say, well, you know, how enforceable is anything really? It's you might do what you can to protect yourself, but at the end of the day, filing a patent application is probably a stronger position.
Yeah, forget your NDA. Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Nobody wants to sign an NDA, so that's a big. Nobody's going to sign. Let's have a chat. Let's get on a Zoom call. I'll send you an NDA during the week. That just, you know, that's untenable. So it's you know, can you create a legal contract from an email exchange? Maybe you can. Maybe you can't. Nobody quite knows. I think the thinking is in the States, at least, that you can, because a lot of the corporate people have been cautioned against what they say in emails, so they don't get involved in contracts. But still, you know, you don't want to go to court with 3 emails saying, yeah, we definitely had a business agreement.
Exactly. That's the problem. I mean, besides of patents, so we talked about whatever resource allocation or priority sequences or all these things which are technical basically, and necessary for realizing a business model for a fintech. So are there other IPs which might be useful for fintechs? So what is your recommendation on that?
Well, other IP, I mean, there's confidential information, but I mean, I think a lot of it is just sort of really being fast. I mean, I guess that's it's a form of IP, it's a form of intangible, just making sure that they can respond and reorient themselves. Yeah, first mover, but also just never stop moving. So, that idea of OODA loop where you're constantly assessing the environment and orienting, deciding and acting, just continually sort of, I guess, fast innovation loops or fast execution loops as a way of reducing risk and then patenting when you can, as you can. But I guess that's, that idea of fast prototyping and fast response, just being first to deliver is, a big part of the, winning, and especially in some sectors of fintech where there are a lot of players or emerging players piling in. Not all of them will survive. There has to be an amount of consolidation, you would think, in terms of, if not into one particular product, then certainly consolidation of talent, and, they work it out from there. So I guess it's patenting is seen as, a bit of a sideshow because they're in such a mad rush to deliver product and get ahead of the competition.
But isn't that contradiction when you say, or when we give the advice to trust to a certain extent on patents, and when we say on the other hand, but innovation should be so fast that that you forget what you said 3 months ago, because now we do something completely different. I mean,
oh, that's the thing. Yeah. So it's. I mean, different companies have different priorities, don't they? They have different preferences. Some of them want to patent, and for some cases, there's a very compelling case. It's patent now or never, because the innovation is really, it's going to run through as a golden thread of any product they're ever going to deliver. And in some cases, the companies are coming up with what you might call thought bubble products every day of the week. And so filing a patent application is close to being a waste of time, because there's a 1% chance that it'll actually become a real product or be of any great use to anybody. So, I mean, that really goes to cultural issues and the nature of the company, I think.
Yeah.
And,
so,
there's a limit to the advice you can give.
Yeah, of course. Especially in generic advice, so to speak. It depends on the specific situation and the specific culture of the specific company. But agility, so being agile and having fast innovation is definitely something which is a success factor in that field. That's for sure. And I would say when you use patents, it's more about the deeper aspects of your technology which you're using. For example, the way how you use data or something like that.
Yeah, something that's absolutely core, and when that's never going to change, then there's an absolute massive compelling proposition. But if FinTechs is in common with a lot of startups, they're moving quickly, and the product they end up delivering is sort of been finessed in multiple times over the course of months. So any patent you might file, it soon becomes out of date. And I think a lot of the entrepreneurs do worry about filing something that will be out of date. And if it becomes published, then it's potentially, if not a bullseye invalidating disclosure, then it's potentially problematic. And, they might be prejudiced from holding back for that reason.
Okay. So what is your forecast? So what do you see in the future of that field of fintech? So will we see a kind of, let's say, like the mobile wars? So a lot of litigation in that field?
Yeah. I think that has to come. I mean, I think electric vehicles and autonomous electric vehicles are another field where there will be mobile patent wars, except it'll be EVs, except it'll be fintech. That's definitely coming, because it's obviously, there's the tide is rising, all the boats are being lifted. There'll have to be a shakeout. And what's driving that is, open banking, 5G. We don't know what the applications for, say, broadcast features for 5G, how that plays out in FinTech. There's a lot happening. We don't know how the incumbent trading banks will respond. They've never really participated that much in the patent system. The credit card companies are sitting on massive portfolios. We don't see much sort of enforcement really there, it seems. We don't know how the central banks will respond. Are they going to release sort of digital currencies? That seems to be something we're not privy to as yet. So there's a lot of unknowns. It's hard to make predictions, but I think it will be exciting times ahead.
And do you have some dedicated patent trolls in that field?
Well, not really. I mean, Intellectual Ventures was buying up a lot of patents a few years ago, and they sort of have stopped doing that.
But they call themselves not a troll, so they are not a troll.
Well, no, they're not a troll. They're an investment firm, and well.
No, I mean, dedicated enforcement strategies, whatever, with whatever intention behind that. So you say Intellectual Ventures has a portfolio on that?
Oh, well, they were. I know up until a few years ago, they were sort of paying $1 million a piece when all these big portfolios were being traded and looking to, I guess, for the right technologies, they'd be looking to sell patents. But I think, especially for FinTech, it's so fragmented. There's so many different applications. How could you possibly sort of invest and sort of buy up portfolios of patents or individual patents with the hope of enforcing them? I think it doesn't sound like an obvious strategy, and I haven't heard much in the way of patent trolls. That seems to be a very much a dated thing now. And maybe the Apple Samsung was the end of that for the time being.
Yeah, maybe it's about we don't see so far in the FinTech world really the dominant design of a business model. So we have a diversity of business models, and and maybe that's a reason why it's not attractive so far for enforcement strategies. Because I mean, what does it help to sue a small company or a company which is changing over the time quite often the details of the business model? So that's not really attractive from an enforcement perspective.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's that great diversity, but there's also a lot of competition, as mentioned before. Buy now, pay later, massive amount of point of sale FinTechs happening in the place. Stripe, if you know that, they're a credit card processing company, makes it easy. Well, I was reading some piece where they actually looked to PayPal, which was massively successful and has its own patent portfolio, and they said, well, how can we find a niche within PayPal? And that's, well, they're very weak on basically data exchange, and they don't have a strong ecosystem. So let's do something a bit like PayPal that will slot in, and they're got a massive valuation and got some of their first funding from PayPal, I believe, because they went and said, "Hey, we've built a better PayPal."
Great.
So yeah, FinTech is already eating itself.
And what do you think? How will the big incumbent companies, like the credit card companies, how will they behave over the time? So is that they want to invest in that FinTechs in terms of like Microsoft?
Yeah, and I don't know. They're a big mystery. I mean, they're sitting on massive patent portfolios, and the strategy looking from the outside in isn't entirely clear. They've got a lot of, I think, speculative technologies that are patented. I mean, thousands and thousands of patents. Visa, MasterCard, American Express to some extent, they're big patent holders. But it's not clear what their rationale is. I think it's maybe a bit of an arms race. They're just trying to sort of, like a lot of industries with 2 or 3 or 4 players. Somebody starts patenting, everybody else starts patenting, and they're all got big patent sort of repositories, but nothing really happens. I haven't seen much enforcement action. But again, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google or Alphabet, they do have quite a few patents in the payments area. It's not the focus of what they're doing, but they've yet to really, participate, I suppose, or really make any bold moves. There was talk of the Facebook bank. Sorry about that.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's too many phones around you.
Oh, no, my laptop is answering calls from my phone for some reason. This is technology. Digital
Great.
disruption is what we call
Yes,
this.
yes. Okay. David, I would like to talk with you an hour more about what is with the big tech companies, and they go into that field and how they behave.
Well, yeah, they're just dabbling for now, but it remains to be seen. Seen.
So for the moment, thank you very much.
No, thank you for having me, Alex. It's been a pleasure.
So I'm absolutely sure we will invite you again. So we should proceed with that discussion. It's fascinating. So thank you very much. Have a good time.
No, thank you. You too. Enjoy the rest.
And I'm happy to have you as an author and a lecturer. So it's great to work with you, and I wish you a great day. Bye to Australia for the moment.
You too, Alex. I'll be delighted.
Bye.
Bye now.